Okay. My name's Stephen. I'm an alcoholic. Um, First of all, Karen, thank you very much for hosting this meeting, for everyone who puts this meeting together and keeps this going. And Dan, I really want to thank you for inviting me out tonight. I really believe this is some of the best service work that we can do. My sobriety date is May 22nd, 2012. I do have a sponsor. He knows he's my sponsor. I did speak to him yesterday. I've sponsored other guys in the program. I like to do service work. I really enjoy and have found a way to fall in love with AA. So before I tell everyone sort of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, I just wanted to share that meditation's been one of those key parts of my program for the last 2 years, and so I'm not actually used to speaking about myself for this long, but I do love the sound of my own voice, so this shouldn't be a problem. Um, and I'm happy to share my story with you all. One thing that really it just came up the other day is we had some family drama rear its ugly head, and the past came out, and everybody wanted to relive it and talk about it, and relive the trauma, and it was phenomenal. I didn't get involved in any of it. I stayed out. Everyone kept saying we have so much family trauma to work on, and I just thought to myself, no, no, I don't. I've worked through all of it. And I don't know anyone in amends. I did not upset anyone in my life. I didn't have to, as my sponsor used to say, don't pick up things that don't belong to you, and these were everyone else's problems, and character defects came out, and it wasn't pretty for a while. I was able to give some people some advice. Some of them took that advice and are having a much better day today, and it's all a testament to this program, and the life that you all have shown me is such a better life to live today. I will sleep peacefully tonight, and it's going to be awesome. So I'll start with explaining. I've moved to Leesburg, Virginia, about 20 years ago, but I grew up outside of Philadelphia. I grew up with a father who loved to make sure we had stuff. So I grew up at Drexel Hill. We had the only pool in the neighborhood. It was the party pool. We had a soda machine that dispensed everything but soda, lots of beer, different kinds of beer. Um, we had the first house with cable TV, and the first house with a microwave, and the first this and the first that. And on the outside, everything looked great. We went to church, we did the rec league stuff, we went to Catholic school, we went to private school, and on the surface, great. If spent a couple nights inside my house, there were nights that were not pretty. Lots of yelling, lots of screaming. I always share that sort of my mom's alcoholism or my dad's workaholism did as much damage to me as my mom's alcoholism did. Uh, in hindsight, through the steps, I've learned that my parents loved me as good as they could, and they tried to do as best as they could. None of the drama and the trauma from growing up was ever intentional. They were probably sick, emotionally immature people, just like I was, and that's sort of how I learned to grow up as a sick, emotionally immature person, because we didn't talk about things, we didn't have conversations, and one of the beautiful things is I have conversations with my kids today, and I'll get into some of that later, that I would have never had with my parents. We have healthy relationships today, and it's just phenomenal. And it's all thanks to this program. Without this program, I would not have the life that I have today. So when Bill talks about in the book being rocketed into the fourth dimension, I get that today. I'm living a life that I never dreamed of. And when I walked into the rooms at AA, I did not want to be here. I did not have your problem. I did not want your solution. I just wanted to feel better. So growing up, I went to a Catholic school. I was not fitting in there, they moved me to a private school. It was very small, and I would say, I never fit in. I just didn't feel right. I couldn't get the girls to like me. I played sports, but I wasn't the best. And the two least popular kids in the class were my best friends. So I was third on the totem pole. Um, and it was great, for that time. But I just never felt. I said something. My friend of mine, I got a chance to be in the New Year's Day parade, the Mummers Parade in Philly, and I was practicing for it, and I broke down in tears. I was having a really tough time, and I said, my parents are getting divorced, and he said, parents don't get divorced. And I said, oh, you should come to my house for a day, just for a night. I had once told my wife that when I spent some time in jail for a DUI, that it was nice to have a quiet night to sleep. Um, Growing up, I had a lot of nights. I said spending a night in jail was much more calm than it was spending a night in my house growing up, especially towards the end of my mom's drinking. and the right before the divorce, which happened, I was roughly 12 years old. So I had spent, holidays, I would run to the park and I would leave the family and I didn't want to be there. But at the end of the day, it wasn't all bad. I mean, my dad allowed me to go to Europe. They took me to Europe. They took me to Busch Gardens. They took me to Disney World. There was a lot of things we did that were good. My dad actually did a lot of good things for me that at the time I didn't understand them. So I try not to focus on all of the negative stuff that happened, but those were the causes and conditions that sort of drove me to drink obsessively. When I got to my fourth step, I knew all the problems. I'd been hiding them forever. I'd been using them as an excuse to drink and behave inappropriately for a long time. Because I said, if you had my life growing up, you would drink too. Because I only wanted to focus on the negative and the downside. I never wanted to look at all the great things that I had. I had parents, like I said, they loved me the best they could, and they tried to give me the best life they could, and they raised me the best way that they knew how. It's not their fault that they didn't know any better. They came from dysfunction too. My grandmother on my dad's side was an alcoholic till the day she died. My grandfather on my mom's side probably died at 55, multiple heart attacks, cirrhosis in the liver, and their spouses had to live with that and watch that happen, and we all had to watch it happen. And it was tough, but um, at the end of the day, I went to high school and I got it was the summer before high school. I got a job at the Jersey Shore down in Wildwood, and I met a girl, and she introduced me to alcohol that you can smoke. Um, and I continued in high school, and I found a bunch of sort of alternative skateboarding kids who didn't care about how you looked or what you said or what you thought. They didn't care about your image. It was just about having fun. And so a lot of those behaviors continued. And I didn't, at first, it was recreational, weekends here and there. And then it became every weekend. And then it became every day. And then it became before school and before work and after work. And it just continued. I remember the first time I got drunk, I was in high school. I'd moved to Florida with my mom, and she was with a crazy one of us, dry one of us who was a little crazy. So I left and I went back. And my dad kept my seat at the school that had offered me a scholarship. So thank you. I always thank him for that. He tried to put me on a stable path in life. Um, my sister came home with her boyfriend and a friend, and he had 240s, and I thought it was Christmas Eve, and it'd be a great time. I thought, oh, I'm hanging out with the big kids, So I drank it with him. I remember going downstairs, and I went into the bedroom, and I turned around to walk, and I walked right into a wall, and I just started laughing. I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. I felt good. I felt normal. I felt okay in my own skin for the first time ever at like 14. I'm laying in bed laughing, and my sister's like, "You gotta shut up. You're gonna get us in trouble. You're gonna get us caught." And I didn't care. I just didn't care. I felt so good. Room was spinning a little bit. It felt awesome, and I wanted more of that. But I didn't actually drink a lot in high school until senior year, but I was at a concert in my junior year of high school, and I found some drugs on the ground. Somebody had dropped some pills, and I took one, and it didn't do anything. I didn't realize, and I found it was still sitting there. And drugs are only a small part of my story, but I took a bunch more, and I went into a 36-hour blackout. I came to at Boston Chicken, if anybody remembers that. It was my first job when they opened them up in Philly. And I came to at the end of the night, and I jumped out the drive-through window because my buddy pulled up with some alcohol. And he said, "Hey, we're drinking." And I literally didn't even clock out. I just jumped out the drive-through window because I needed to escape. I didn't like the way that I was feeling. A couple things happened, and I wound up in an outpatient rehab facility. Um, and it was a way to sort of get sympathy from everybody. I started going to NA, and I met a guy, and he offered to be my sponsor, and I refused to do anything that he said. One day he looked at me and he said, "You're not one of us." He goes, "I don't know why you're coming here anymore." And that was my ticket. I was out. I was, "Hey, look, I'm cured. This is great. I don't have a problem anymore. I can go back to doing the things I like to do." And in hindsight, I realized what he meant was, "You're not ready for the solution. You don't have the same problem that we have, or you're not willing to admit it," is really what he was saying to me. And he was absolutely right. So at 17 years old, I had already been through outpatient rehab, therapy, and all that stuff, and I still didn't have your problem. And if I don't have your problem, I don't need your solution. So slowly got back into drinking and drugs. College came and it was a lot of drinking, and it was appropriate at the time. It was a lot of fun. We would go out and party and have a blast. There came up, and again, it was recreational at first, and then it became weekends, and then it was every weekend. Then it was Thursday through Friday, then sometimes on Sunday, and then Monday because it was football, and then Tuesday because, well, I had class, so I'd literally go to the bar, order some beers. I had a night class. I'd do my homework at the bar, and I thought, well, if I'm eating and doing my homework, drinking's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. A couple beers before class. Um, I was still getting good grades. The wheels hadn't come off yet. Um, and then it just progressed, and it continued to progress to sort of an everyday drinking thing. And then I got arrested for the second time, and it was a drug charge, and it was a felony drug charge at that time. And I failed out of school because I didn't show up. Here's a word of advice: if you don't show up for your finals, you fail school. I didn't tell my dad. He got the report that I failed, and he called me and said one of the greatest things he actually did for me. He said, "I hope you still have a job because your rent's due next month." Because the deal was, as long as I'm in school, he's paying my rent. He goes, "You're not in school, not paying your rent." My dad taught me how to have a job. He taught me how to keep a job, and he taught me how to be responsible through some of those hard lessons that I didn't want to learn. So I'm grateful for that. So I continued to drink. I made really, really good friends with the guy who owned the beer distributor down the street from me. He was a raging alcoholic. He put a gun to his head and blew his brains out one day, and killed himself because he couldn't get the solution to this disease. And he would tell my wife when she came in that I was the biggest POS that he ever met. Um, and it was like, wow, look how arrogant of you to tell me that. Look at yourself. But in hindsight, he was probably onto something there, that I was just as bad as he was, and I didn't want to admit it. I had a bum once tell me I had a drinking problem, and I laughed at him because I said, "Well, I have a house." He's like, "Yeah, but you got a drinking problem too." Um, so I threw him out because that's what I don't, don't ever address my problem. I hung out and surrounded myself with people who drank like I did. If you didn't drink like I did, I made sure that I had something that you wanted from me so that I could keep you around. Because there was times where people got sick of my drinking. Usually, I was a lot of fun, and there was always a moment where I became unfun, and I didn't always really black out, but I became obnoxious. I became irritable. I became discontented, and I just became annoying to hang out with. And then I peed my pants once I passed out. That was my MO. I had a friend once who picked me up and brought me inside. He was really mad at me the next morning. And I said, "Vince, what did I do?" He goes, "You peed on me." And he explained that he picked me up from the couch because he didn't want me sleeping outside. And I said, "Well, there was your first problem. You should have left me on the couch. You should have just not touched me." Um, and I didn't seem to care that I ruined your stuff. It didn't really. It was part of hanging out with me. If you wanted me around, that was the price that you paid. And I didn't really seem to care very much. So that behavior continued till I met this. I was very lonely. I was lonely, and I was just working. I met this girl, and still married to her today. She's an angel. She's a saint. She looked at me one day after work and she said, "Hey, how about you just not drink tonight? It's Tuesday." I said, "Okay, not a problem." I remember sitting in bed and I was shaking. I was twitching. She goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I don't know. Must just be really tired." I didn't realize I was experiencing the withdrawal symptoms of alcohol at 22 years old, or 21, whatever I was, probably 22. Um, I was already experiencing stuff like that. And I just brushed it off. I did control my drinking a little bit more after that. I still drank a lot, tried to keep it reasonable. She really is the person in my life who taught me truly how to love someone, how to have unconditional love for another person. I didn't know that. I wasn't really taught that growing up. I wasn't just we didn't discuss it. We didn't talk about things like that. So um, forever grateful for her still being in my life. And every day I gotta remember that I owe her everything. Um, just like I owe this program everything. So time went on. We got married. We decided to have a kid. We would take shifts. She would do a certain amount. I would do another amount. I would do the night shift because I was more of a night owl, and I would find myself, walking my daughter around the house and bouncing her and carrying her and sitting in a chair. And one night, it seemed like a good idea to have a glass of whiskey while I was doing that. And then that behavior continued, and it continued, and it continued, and it just didn't stop. Um, there were periods of control. periods of not drinking as much in a lot of those years, and then there was periods of excessive drinking. Um, so had a kid. 2 years later, we decided to have another kid. I get a great. I'm in a great job. We're moving up in the world. My company gets sold out. It's 2008. The mortgage. I'm in mortgages, underwriter, quality control, and get laid off. And I thought it was the end of the world. I showed up at 10 o'clock in the morning with a 12 pack in my hand and just, hey, I got laid off. It was great. I had 3 months severance, 3 months of pay. On top of the severance, I had pay. It was great. There was a lot of money coming at me, and I just drank. I drank every day. I looked for jobs while I drank, and I went on an interview or two, and got rejected because I showed up so probably still drunk from the night before, and they could tell. I was like shaking in the interview. I didn't know what to do. I eventually did get a job. It was not the job I wanted. It was selling Verizon file services in a mall, but it was necessary. I knew I needed a job to keep my family afloat, and that's another thing my dad had taught me: how to get a job, how to hold a job, how to keep a job, and how important that is for part of your stability. Um, so I get the job, and this kid has a birthday party, and I decide it's going to be great. We go out to the birthday party, and my wife asked me that night, walking out the door, she said, "Do you need a ride to the bar?" And that was a sign. I probably shouldn't have been driving to the bar. So we have a bunch of drinks there. I'm actually probably the most coherent person there. Everybody else is pretty smashed. I took a kid's keys. I helped him clean up his puke. Like, I was the babysitter. And I got a DUI on the way home that night because by the time everything hit me, I was already driving. My wife was driving around town. I got arrested. She thought I was in Fairfax, which we had already moved to Virginia. Turns out I got arrested in Loudon. So I was in Loudon jail. She thought I was dead on the side of the road, and she was driving around, and she had a 3-month-old new baby in the house. Um, and I didn't care. That was my selfish, self centered behavior because I wanted what I wanted, and I assumed everything would be okay. And I thought that was about 30 years old. I thought that was the end. I thought, this is it. I finally learned, suffered enough that I will never drink like that again. And I meant it. I went to jail for 10 days. I did an outpatient rehab stint, a therapy stint. I did a ASAP classes for alcohol. I did everything you're supposed to do. And then come a year into it, I got the breathalyzer off my car. The classes were done. My buddy was getting married in Omaha, so I flew out there, and I convinced my wife that it was okay to drink the night of the wedding. And off to the races I went. We came home and we wrote out a set of rules of how I would drink in the house. I don't know if anybody else has ever wrote out rules with their significant other about how they needed to drink, but non-alcoholics don't have to do that stuff. That should have been another sign that something was wrong. I proceeded to probably break all of those rules. I'm sure there were rules that were unwritten that I broke too along the way, and I continued the behavior. When the drinking got bad enough again, I had to hide it. So I couldn't hide the bottles, so I switched to vodka, and I would make up excuses to go to the basement and check emails and do work, and I eventually started. I worked from home 3 days a week. I started drinking during the day while I was working, and I was really good at managing all of it so nobody knew. Although my boss did call me one time, I was a little tipsy and I was a little afraid that she was going to find out. I managed through that one too. So I was able to keep things together. Um, I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. I didn't know that I really truly, I didn't know what the problem was. I just knew I couldn't stop drinking, and I didn't want to keep drinking, and I didn't know how to stop. And I also didn't know how to be honest with anyone about it. I was scared of what would happen if I did. Um, and so I just kept doing it because I didn't know any other solution. And what happened was there was a night where I went. My sister came into town and she was sober at the time, and I was not. And I was drinking that day. And I went to my brother's house and we were playing a card game with his kids, who were probably 10 and 12. And I was acting like a college idiot. Like, I was playing college card games and I was screaming at people. I was in a blackout. I don't remember really any of it. Um, so the next day was Sunday, and we decided not to talk about it, sort of brushed it under the rug. Um, Monday came, and I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what to do. I knew I couldn't drink during the day while I was working, but I knew I couldn't make it through the night without drinking. So I was at that jumping off point they talk about in the book, when you're unable to imagine life with alcohol or life without alcohol. And so I just drank a pint of Jack Daniels. I'd read the book before and I knew people had hid it in their bedside table. And I thought that was the most alcoholic thing anybody could do. Like, couldn't you think of a better hiding place? Did you really have to have it like within arm's length? And that's where my pint wound up that night, in the bedside table, so that I could drink it once my wife went to bed. That was the last drink that I ever had. I remember it to this day. I remember the feeling of being so scared that I couldn't drink, and so scared that I needed to drink. So the next morning, coming home from work the next day, my sister called me. She talked to me the whole time. I was not expecting it. I got home and thought, oh crap, I didn't stop at the liquor store. What am I going to do? How am I going to get through tonight? I can't, I don't know what's going to happen. And my sister sent my brother or my wife a text about my drinking, and my wife showed it to me, and she said, "What does this mean?" And it was like that movie Flight, if you've ever seen it, where he's telling his story, and he said he just didn't have one more lie in him. And I just said, I have a serious drinking problem, and I don't know what to do. And she probably said the most graceful words I've ever heard from someone. She goes, "You need to go get help right now." And I didn't deserve that kind of grace. I deserved her to say a lot more to me. I deserved a lot more. And I said, "Okay, I'll call someone tomorrow and figure it out." And she said, "No, you need to get out of here tonight." And I knew there was an AA club that I had been to after my DUI. So I called this guy and he reminded me, and I showed up at the Tuesday night Ask It Basket meeting, which I still attend to this day. It was there for me when I needed it most. And I love to be there for when the newcomer comes in and they need it the most, or even the old timer. You never know. Um, and that started my journey. There was a gentleman, I met a guy there who spoke a lot. And there was another gentleman who said something to me afterwards. I shared my story, and he said, he goes, I came here. He's 3 months sober. We called him Handsome James. And he said, I came here for myself, came here for my family, or came here for my family, came here for everyone else. He goes, but today I'm here for myself. He goes, I hope that you can find that too. And at 3 months sober, I believed him. And it gave me something to try and do, to be sober for myself, because I'd never ever tried that before. And the next day I walked into a meeting because they said, come back. And there was a guy from the night before, and I mumbled something to him after the meeting in the hall. And he goes, "Do you need a sponsor?" I said, "I don't know, but I need something more than I had yesterday. I don't know what it is." And I agreed for him to be my sponsor. And he's the gentleman I talked to yesterday. He is still my sponsor today. Um, and the funny thing is, he didn't have much in his life. I had a lot of, but I had a lot of stuff. Materialistically, we were pretty set. We had the house, we had the kids, we had the two cars, we had the money in the bank, we had this, that. We go on vacation. Um, he was living out of his car sometimes. He couldn't always live at his mom's house. So you're living with your mom, you're living out of your car, you're unemployed, you have no job, and you're showing up to AA every day and shaking people's hands and trying to help people out. And I thought, why would you do that? I said, maybe I can find that too. Maybe that's something that I can work towards. So that's what I did. And I did everything that he said. He said to call me every day. So I called him every day. He said, for all that you know about AA, I've been exposed to AA since I was 12 years old. I went to my first meeting at 12 because my mom didn't have a babysitter. I met my future guidance counselor at that meeting. I was assigned a guidance counselor because they knew my family history from my brother. So I was assigned a guidance counselor when I walked into school, to meet with once a week with some of my friends. I met her at my first meeting. Um, and and really, I had all this book knowledge. I'd been to outpatient rehab and I went to ASAP classes. I did all this stuff. And he would say, "You don't know squat about AA." He goes, "So you need to read How It Works every morning." And I read it till I memorized it. He goes, he goes, "I'm going to tell you something." He goes, "At the end of the night, I want you to read the promises, because there's hope in this program." And I didn't understand what he was doing for me. And so every morning I would wake up and read How It Works. And every night I would go to bed reading the promises. And funny story, one day I was reading the book and I was trying to put him to bed. And so I was just reading the book while he fell asleep. And he goes, "Dad, why don't you read me some of that book?" And it was chapter 2, There Is a Solution. Because I would read There Is a Solution every night too, literally because the chapter said there is a solution. And I needed something. I didn't know what I needed, but I loved the name of that chapter. And so I started reading it to him, and he looked at me, he goes, "Can you just read that like a lot quieter?" Because it didn't make sense to a 2-year-old. And I just laughed at him. And I said, "Sure, no problem." So that's where it started. That was my journey. I'd been in and out of AA and NA before, but I never did anything. I never really committed to the program. I had guys that were willing to help me, and I used them for what I needed to get out of trouble, to get people off my back, to get sort of my life straight, and then I abandoned them. And I abandoned AA because I didn't have your problem. So I didn't really need your solution. I was going to figure this thing out on my own. No, so I started working with this guy and I started doing anything he told me. He told me to write down 10 things that were uh, evidence of my powerlessness over alcohol. The first written evidence I was willing to put on paper. And so I did that. And then we talked about the second step. And he would tell me to read parts of the book, and then we would talk about it, and he would share his experience, strength, and hope with me. Um, and the second step, and today I look at the second step as, do you believe in God or not? Do you believe in a higher power or not? And it doesn't matter what your answer is. I just want to know where we stand at that point. I think my answer changed as I went through sobriety. I don't know that I really believed, but I was willing to believe that he believed, and I was willing to. And he would say things like, my higher power, was the sun when it first started. He said it would wake up, it was bigger than me, and it was there every day, and that was good enough for me. So find something to start with. Um, and then we would do that. I kept asking things at the Ask It basket. You put a question in the basket, and I would ask things like, "How do you do the third step?" And he would look at me and go, just shake his head, you know. And eventually one day he pulled me out of the parking lot and he said, "You're ready." And I don't know why. Something had changed in the way I was sharing. And a grown man, bigger than me, grabbed my hand in nighttime in a parking lot in Leesburg, and I was really uncomfortable. He held my hand and said, "Repeat after me." And we read the third step prayer. And I said, "Awesome, I did the third step." And he immediately handed me pen and paper. And he said, "Get to writing." So I waited 6 months and I started writing. 'Cause that's how we do the four steps sometimes. Uh, the writing of the four step didn't take me that long, hour or two. Took me 6 months to put the pen to the paper, and once I did, I felt really good when I finished it. And one thing I did in my four step is, there's something that happened to me when I was before I even drank. That was the most embarrassing thing in my life, and I wanted to take it to the grave and never tell anybody about it ever again. And I moved that to the top of my list, and God intervened at that point, and he said, and I said, just said, if I don't tell somebody this, and I'm not willing to tell somebody this, then I'm not willing to get sober. And it was the first thing I shared with him. And he said, "Let me tell you a similar story about what happened to me in a situation like that." And I immediately felt relief. I said, "Oh my God, I'm not alone." And I've talked to a couple of guys I've taken the fourth step with, um, have also shared a similar experience. And I shared my experience with them. I only share it with guys when it's necessary. I don't mind talking about it, but I don't bring it up and the details of it. But when I need to, and that's in the promises, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. And I don't know if all those guys are sober today. I think some of them still are. I don't. Some of them have decided not to keep calling me, and that's okay. I always say I'm batting 1,000 when it comes to sponsorship. I haven't drank over a single sponsee's problems, not one of them. Can't say the same about them. But that's something Dave 3 used to say to me. He would tell me. Dave 3 was a meeting that Dan and I used to attend, and Dave 4, who's on here, I saw him jump on. Um, so it's like a little reunion. Dave 3 has since passed on. But he would say things like that. Never drank over a single one of my sponsees' problems. And that's how it works. That's why we do it. So did the fourth step, did the fifth step, and the fifth step was magical because I went out. My sponsor actually took me out to go play poker, and it happened to be at a hotel bar, in a room off to the side. And I stink at poker, so I got busted out. And I'm sitting at the bar, and I'm watching these guys come in who are construction workers, and they're getting hammered. And I just realized, oh my God, I thought that's what I wanted my life to be like. And it looked so ugly and so messy and so disgusting. I went outside and called my wife, and she said to me, "I'm not worried about you tonight." And I thought, wow, how selfish of me. I never cared. I always did what I wanted to do, and I didn't care how people thought. I didn't really think about what people thought when I went out and I did stuff. And again, one of those graceful things that just changed my whole perception of how I should act and behave in my life. So we went on. I called him that night and I said, "Hey, I read 6 and 7 in the book too. I'm done with those." And he just laughed at me. He said, "Right, keep coming back. I'll talk to you tomorrow." So we wrote out a list of all my character defects. And he said, besides every defect, he goes, put a liability. Doesn't matter what it is, just put a liability because you're not just a bad person. And the seventh step prayer talks about, "God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as I will." No, sorry, that's the third step prayer. Somewhere in the seventh step prayer, it talks about I give myself to you, the good and the bad. So recognizing that we are both good and bad people. And as Dave 3 also used to say, there's a bit of good in the worst of us and a bit of bad in the best of us. And that was recognizing that. And Sally used to share about that as well. And she really, just changed my perspective. I don't have to just look at the bad things. And as it fed into the 10th step, it was like, a day spent in red ink is not a good day. There's always got to be something positive that happens. So we did 6 and 7, we did more writing, and then I wrote my amends, and he said, start making your amends, and my friend Teague would say, well, if you want to, how free do you want to be? How many amends do you want to make depends on how free you want to be. And so I did my grandmom first because she was getting older, and I didn't even get through the amends. I didn't even get to the part where I lied to her. She just said, "Hey, stop." And I got through most of it with my dad, and he said, "Stop. I don't need to hear anymore." And I always thought I get to decide the living amends. I'll say, "Oh, I'll just do a living amends." And I didn't realize that they got to decide that I did a living amends because all of them said, "As we're really proud of you, and as long as you keep doing what you are doing today, we're all square. Be a good husband, be a good father, be a good friend. Don't drink, and we're good." And the flip side of that coin was go back to drinking and behaving like that, and all bets are off. The amends is squashed, you know. So they gave me the living amends to work with. And every day I got to wake up and remember that I have that amends to make, you know. And I sort of skimped on 11 for the longest time. I just didn't feel like it was necessary. Prayer was here and there. Meditation wasn't necessary. I did start 12th step work. I worked with other alcoholics. I did service work. I did all the way up through like the GSR position. I still have service positions. I always maintain some level of service position at some group level. I show up and share. I'll help clean up. I'll talk to guys before the meeting, after the meeting. I love to do all that stuff. And about 2 years ago, I said, I need something different. Something's not right. I'm still upset about things, still getting annoyed and angry at things. So I went to a meditation meeting and I went back. And then I kept going back and I found another one. So I was doing 2 meditation meetings a week and I downloaded this meditation app. And that was about 2 years ago. And man, my sobriety has changed. My ability to deal with my emotions is so much better today than it ever was before. I know I got about 5 minutes and I'll wrap it up, but that has been a game changer. And I'm like, why did you wait 11 years or 10 years to start doing something that is so good for you? Uh, but that's how we behave sometimes. We don't know, or we don't trust it, or we don't believe we need it, and then we do it. And I had a moment with prayer too, where I said a prayer. I thought I was going to go out and just say, God, please fix my life. There was something happened between me and my wife, and I just said, God, please don't let me drink. And my prayer changed. I didn't expect that. And then the meditation has really changed, and a direct result. This is the situation that just happened. I didn't have to get emotional. I didn't have to own people's emotions. I didn't have to react, and my character defects stayed in the shallow end. I stayed in the shallow end with them. We can't ever get rid of our character defects. We're always sort of toeing the water with them, unfortunately. But I didn't jump into the deep end and start playing with all of them. And that was different, and it felt really good. Um, so today, I've heard things, people said, find a way to fall in love with AA, and that's what I try to do today, whether it's service work, picking up the phone, calling somebody, reaching out, doing a little service, whatever it is, find a way to fall in love with AA today. It's a phenomenal program. It has changed my life in ways that I did not imagine possible. I came into AA and I thought, lock me up. I'm condemned to AA. My life is over. And that is just so far from the truth. My life is better. And people say, well, what do you do now that you're sober? I say, anything you want. We're getting to go on a vacation to Cancun, somewhere we've wanted to go for years. We got to go on a cruise to Europe last, something else we wanted to do for years. I got to treat my kids to things that we've wanted to do. We get to just have fun and spend time together. My daughter's in college and she's gotten in not trouble herself, but her friends have gotten in trouble. And she's called me and said, Dad, I'm scared. I don't know what to do here. Have you had any experience with this? And I said, you can call me about anything. Chances are, unfortunately, I've probably had some experience with it. I've lost some friends in college. I've gotten arrested. I've been down those roads. I said, you don't have to call me afterwards. You can call me right in the middle of the situation, and I will talk to you and tell you what you should do and what I think is your best options. She will call me and say, hey, she called me from a graduation party. She said, Dad, I had a little too much to drink, more than I thought, and I'd like to come home now. I don't feel comfortable around these people. And I thought, well, I would have just passed out and peed on their couch, because that's what I did. Um, but how mature. And I'm like, wow, I never thought this was the life. There was a guy, Trucker John, who shared early on in my sobriety. He's passed on, a big heavy set trucker guy, tattoos, really super humble. And he would just say, he said, I'm living the dreams of my childhood. And I broke down in tears in that meeting, sitting in the front row. And he said, are you okay? And I said, I forgot that I had dreams as a child. My dream was simply to not be like the family that I grew up in. I just wanted to be a good husband, a good father, a good friend, to everyone around me, and I had been ruining that. I had been behaving and acting like I was raised, and I didn't know it. I just didn't know, um, and I just saw the solution of living a different life, that I could have all of those dreams back, and I hadn't ruined it yet, and I was just overcome with emotion. And I've seen some amazing things. I saw a guy. I'll end in just a minute. I was in a meeting in Wildwood, New Jersey, and this guy was sharing, and he 25 years sober, and he broke down in tears, and he said, I was a degenerate, homeless, illiterate drug addict, and AA taught me how to read, taught me how to get a job, gave me a family. And I just went up to him afterwards. I went to shake his hand, and he said, you better not try to shake my hand. And he put his arms out, big South Philly guy, and just gave me a hug. And I thought, wow, if look what AA has done for people, you know. And it just touched me, like nothing else. And I said, if I ever get back to South Philly, I'm going to your South Philly group. If I'm ever back there and I can attend, I'd love to see you again. Um, so that's my story. I've really just fallen, like I said, fallen in love with AA. I really enjoy it. It is a focus point of my life. I continue to go to meetings every day, not every day, but as often as I can. I continue to just try to be a better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better servant to AA, a trusted servant. And really, just thank you so much, Dan, for giving me the opportunity to come tell my story. I really appreciate it. And I thank you all for being here, to listen to me. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.